And we will just wait a moment here. Oh, it just clicked over for me, so anytime you're ready, we are good to go. Good afternoon, everyone. I call to order this special meeting of council for Tuesday, June 18th, 2024. And Ms. Sauvé, thank you for stepping forward to do the land acknowledgement this morning. The microphone is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor Cressard and members of council. I'd like to begin this meeting by recognizing and respecting the endurance and the enduring presence, contributions, and resilience of the Indigenous peoples who continue to maintain their relationships with this land, where we work, live, play, and create family and community. Their knowledge, traditions, and history remind us of the importance of honoring and protecting the land, the water, and all living beings that call this place home. I also acknowledge the ongoing work towards reconciliation, understanding, and collaboration with Indigenous communities and commit myself to learning from and supporting their efforts to protect and preserve their cultures, their languages, and their traditional knowledge. For me, land acknowledgement and land acknowledgements are not just a formality or a token gesture. They're an important step in recognizing the ongoing impacts of colonization on Indigenous peoples and their lands. They allow us to recognize the resilience and continued presence of Indigenous peoples and to acknowledge the values and of their contributions to our society. When we make a land acknowledgement, we're not just acknowledging the past, we're also committing to taking concrete actions to support Indigenous communities into the future, such as by supporting Indigenous-led initiatives and by advocating for Indigenous rights, self-determination, and sovereignty. I'm grateful for and respect this land and the people who lived on it for thousands of years, and thankful for this opportunity to provide a land acknowledgement today.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Moving to approval of the agenda before we get to the main item for business. Looking to see if there are any changes. Seeing none, I move approval of the agenda for June 18th, 2024 special meeting of council as circulated. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. I will, just for everyone's sake, note that Councillor McCallum is joining us virtually, and so that's why I will also be looking up to see if there are any questions coming from Councillor McCallum. So now we'll move to item H1, our sole item for business today, Council Remuneration Committee recommendations. Ms. Sauvé, are you going to be making an introduction?
I will indeed.
Great.
Thank you again, Mayor Cressard, members of council. So before the chair comes up here, I just wanted to take a couple of minutes for a high-level introduction to the committee and what they've taken on these past 7 months. I believe that. First off, this is the first Town of Canmore Council Remuneration Review Committee, and their assignment was really not as straightforward and easy as it might seem. Also, because they were first, they had nothing to build from, so they're really paving the way for later committees. And then second, but really first, the people on this committee are people from our community. They live here, they pay taxes, and they're volunteers. And so not only did they not get paid for the substantial amount of time that they provided and their intellectual effort, but these are people from our community who raised their hands in hopes of making a difference here. Their contributions were not only time, but they brought to the table skill, effort, and insight. And they were really a well-rounded group with a solid ability for this challenge, and it was a challenge. They analyzed a lot of data, some traditional, some salary surveys, and some less traditional. They looked at dashboards, job boards, public sector, collective bargaining agreements, affordability indicators, statistics of all kinds, and demographic info. They asked and answered some difficult questions. And I think the work in the context was more intricate than expected when I spoke to them on the phone way back then. They had to assess all this information, make recommendations, and also justify those recommendations. And really their goal is to not only attract a broader range of candidates in the future, but also really acknowledge the impactful and consuming work that's performed by elected officials here in Canmore. Ultimately, they're bringing forward something different. So it's not a traditional common approach to compensation, and it's a step. It's a step that creates a platform for the next committee to step up from. So after their presentation, Ms. Rogers will present motions for Council's consideration and vote. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce Craig Saloff, the committee chair and the presenter of Council's Remuneration Review Committee's recommendations for Council.
Great, thank you very much. Mr. Saloff and everyone, welcome to Council this afternoon. And well, I will thank you again, but I just want to acknowledge right now that thank you for all of your time and being trailblazers with regards to this process. So thank you, and the microphone is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of Council. We appreciate the opportunity to present to you today on behalf of my colleagues Jen Marin, Laurie Edward, Harry Scott, and Simon Arell. I'd also like to acknowledge the tremendous support we did receive from members of administration, Therese Rogers, Joanna, and Jolene Noel. Now, before discussing our recommendations, I just want to set the stage a little bit. Take a look at the context in which we did our work, which led to the approach we used for our recommendations. So just touching briefly on our mandate, you're all well aware of this, but we were tasked with having a look at the council remuneration policy and the guiding principles, providing recommendations on that policy, and also making specific recommendations for remuneration. And in this case, remuneration is referring to base salary and per diems, benefits and allowances and expenses. We're also asked to look at and comment on, pardon me, full-time equivalent status, options for making periodic adjustments to existing remuneration, and standards for remuneration review. My apologies, I'm just getting over a bit of a cold.
No worries.
So starting with the context, this slide is really key to understanding our recommendations. So we identified what we thought were three key factors. The first one is what we called Canmore's unique context. Now you might have seen in the last month or two, Statistics Canada affirmed what we already know, and that's that we live in one of the most expensive municipalities in Canada. And this is relevant for our work, as of course people putting their names forward as candidates must be residents of Canmore. Secondly, remuneration must not be, second is council workload. And as we did our research, it became apparent to us the level of work that you put into this. In fact, we settled on an estimation of 25 to 30 hours a week, which is really kind of at the top end of comparator municipalities, in some cases, far above. Like for example, in a recent survey, Banff councillors reported that they worked on average 6 to 10 hours per week. So this was obviously something we bore in mind.
And that's for councillors.
That's for councillors,
Yep.
That's correct.
Yep.
Next, so again, overall we were at the top end of the similarly sized municipalities. And last, there's a variability of time requirements. When we say an average of 25 to 30 hours per week, we're mindful of the fact that this isn't every week. As you obviously are aware, during some seasons, take the fall for instance, at budget time, you're working possibly considerably in excess of 30 hours per week, and perhaps in the summer it eases off a little bit. But we thought that 25 to 30 hours was a good estimation. And we derived that from the survey, which you all participated in, as well as members of the previous two councils. And while there was sort of a variability in the estimate of time, the answers really coalesced around 25 to 30 hours per week. Now, we didn't just take your word for it. We were provided with information by administration, which listed all of the council meetings over the last couple of years, the duration of those meetings, plus an estimated amount of preparation time. And lo and behold, taking a look at that, it really did verify the 25 to 30 hours per week. So we're quite comfortable with that estimation. Again, for councillors, for the mayor, we'd call it 40+ hours per week. So, moving to the principles we applied. These are taken from the bylaw, so you're probably familiar with them. First of all, the remuneration must be fair and reasonable, and it must not be a barrier to a diverse and representative pool of candidates from Canmore residents. Now, when we saw the word diverse, we were wondering what it meant in this context. So we took a look at the videos of your deliberations, which led to the creation of this committee, and it became evident that what you had in mind was, I guess, to call it economic diversity. In other words, to have a diverse set of candidates, the remuneration must be fair and reasonable to as broad a cross-section of Canmore residents as possible. And last, the remuneration must recognize the complexity, responsibilities, and time commitments associated with the role of elected officials. Now, perhaps you're aware of the job evaluation tools that are often used by HR professionals. And there's typically 3 pillars in these tools. The first one is formal qualifications. Now, we're mindful of the fact that there are no formal qualifications specified for your roles, but the second pillar is what we call the size of the job. And I think this is really what this third bullet is speaking to. And in this case, the size of the job is measured by complexity, the level of responsibilities, and the time commitments. So we had no problem in deciding that all of your jobs have a considerable size to them. And last, the third factor is the impact on the organization in this case being the town of Canmore. And it goes without saying that the impact of your work on the town is sizable. So this leads to our approach. You'll see we've called it non-formulaic. Now, you might be used to a more traditional approach where step 1, you identify relevant external comparators, you target a percentile, and then you plug in the numbers. So to take an example, we might say we're going to pay at 50% of the level of our comparators. Well, it became evident to us quite quickly because of those 3 contextual factors that it wasn't going to work. You can't make a direct comparison with municipalities where the cost of living is lower, the amount of time worked by members of council in this case is far greater, and there's additional complexity to the work you do and variability in time. So trying to use a direct comparison was really trying to compare apples to oranges. So what we did instead, as you'll see, is we used internal and external data. Now, what do I mean by internal data? Well, just to give you an example, we started with the town of Canmore pay grid for its staff. And we found this useful because that document had a lot of detail in terms of the responsibilities and expected time commitments for various staff members in Canmore. But also, and perhaps more importantly, of course, is that the town of Canmore is the second largest employer. So we took this internal data and we made estimates as to what we thought were fair and reasonable remuneration amounts. But of course, we didn't stop there. We didn't dismiss external data completely, but we used the external data as kind of a sense check after the fact when we had our numbers in hand, just to make sure that we weren't going too far afield. So moving on to our recommendations for councillors. You'll see that we're recommending an increase in the base salary from $32,600 to $53,000. Now, the rationale is we think this reflects the high workload, which I've already talked about, the inclusion of required activities in the base salary. I'll get to that in more detail momentarily. Plus, of course, a local affordability adjustment. Moving on to per diems, our first recommendation is that required per diem activities be added to base salary and taken away from per diem compensation. And we feel that the reason why this makes sense is it enables base salary to reflect the required time commitment expected of councillors. It simplifies the administration of per diems and allows a more regular and uniform pay schedule for required activities. Conversely, we're recommending that optional activities that are currently part of base salary be moved from base salary to per diem compensation. Next, we're suggesting that there is no need for a cost of living adjustment to the per diem rates, during this cycle. And that's for two reasons. One, that the per diem rates are, of course, piece rates. And we did compare these piece rates with the similar rates used for our external comparators. And our rates are at the top end of the range already. So we didn't think that an adjustment is required this time, but we would suggest that the next committee in 4 years revisit the issue. Last, we're suggesting that per diem compensation be added to the amount that's used to determine eligible GRSP plan contributions. And the reason for this is for the mayor and for members of the town staff, the contributions are applied to the total amount of cash compensation. So we thought it made sense to include per diem compensation for councillors, as this is obviously an important part of the compensation. Moving on to benefits. First, we're suggesting that basic benefits be left as they are right now. The reason for this is that the councillors' benefits are aligned with the town of Canmore employee benefits, and these are in fact full-time benefits which are being offered to councillors which are still not technically a full-time position. Next, the menu of benefits being offered by the town of Canmore is as broad, if not broader in most instances, as those being offered by our comparator municipalities. And last, the town of Canmore is paying on average more for councillor for benefits than its next highest comparator and well above the median. For workers' compensation, we're suggesting that the current program remain in place, and that's the one offered by AMSC. The reason for that is it offers 24/7 coverage, which we feel is more suited to the irregular hours worked by council members. Next, for employee and family assistance programs, we recommend that that remain the same, as well as the fitness program. Next, we're recommending the creation of a medical leave policy. The reason being that it's currently provided for town of Canmore staff, and it's also contemplated by the 2017 amendments to the Municipal Government Act. We're also recommending the adoption of a maternity-paternity leave bylaw, as we think it makes council positions more accessible and feasible for everyone. And we did notice there's an emerging trend among municipalities to adopt this type of program. For instance, the town of Banff recently brought in a bylaw for this type of leave. Next, we're recommending that the Bring Your Own Device program be extended to members of council in respect of their cell phones, as you do use your cell phones for town business. The next area we looked at was full-time equivalent status. And again, you're probably familiar with an approach where a part-time position is expressed as a percentage of the equivalent full-time job. Now, we didn't really think that this was useful in this case, and the reason being, when we looked at our information sources, they all tend to use a different number of hours to express a full-time job, and that ranged from a low of about 30 hours to a high of 44. So we thought instead it's just more clear when you say that the average time spent by councillors is 25 to 30 hours per week. Moving on to the mayor. The first recommendation is that base pay be increased from approximately $119,000 to $130,000, as we feel this increase reflects the high workload of 40-plus hours per week, the considerable size of the job, and again, local affordability considerations. We're not recommending any changes to per diem eligibility for the mayor, and our recommendations for benefits are the same as they are for the rest of council. For full-time equivalent status, we're again suggesting that the mayor's job be described as requiring 40-plus hours per week. So, attaching some numbers to our recommendations, again, you'll see that the base salary for councillors is increasing from approximately $32,000 to $53,000. Currently, the average per diem for councillors is approximately $12,300. If our recommendations are accepted, we expect that this average per diem will in fact decrease to $6,000. And that's again because we recommend moving required counselor activities from per diem to base salary. We anticipate the GRSP contributions would increase from $2,900 to approximately $5,100, which would yield a total from $50,000 now to approximately $64,400 if all the recommendations are accepted. Shifting to the mayor, again, the base salary under our recommendation would increase from $119,000 to $130,000. GRSP contributions would increase from approximately $10,000 to $11,000, which would mean the total would change from approximately $129,000 to $141,000. So now looking at the total financial impact of our recommendations, we expect that there'd be a total increase in pay of $126,000 per year. GRSPs would increase by $14,000. There'd be a total increase per year of employer premiums and deductions of $19,000, and a total increase in allowances of approximately $2,100. And this would result in a change of approximately $161,000 per year. Now, administration took these numbers and determined that this would require an increase in taxes, all else equal, of 0.46%, which translated means approximately an increase of $10 per year for the median Canmore family. So moving on to our recommendations for future reviews. First of all, for adjustments to establish remuneration, we're suggesting that the town continue to make annual adjustments to the mayor's base salary and the councillor's base salary using a cost of living adjustment. And the reason for this is, of course, this is the approach used for Town of Canmore staff. And we also noticed that all but 2 of surveyed Alberta municipalities indicated that they made such an adjustment, and it was typically on the basis as the adjustment used for their staff. Now, for standards for remuneration review, we were pretty happy with the approach that we used in the present case. In other words, the council remuneration policy be reviewed every 4 years, and recommendations be submitted to council on or before June 30th of the year before an election. For the next committee in 4 years, we're suggesting that they start with the approach we used and make whatever changes or modifications that they feel that the context might require. We also suggest that a provision be included for immediate adjustment where needed in the event that the CRA changes the rules affecting politicians' compensation. And last and importantly, we suggest that appropriate metrics be established to review the diversity of the next council's candidates to determine whether in fact the recommendations have resulted in an increase in diversity. So just wrapping all this up, it's our view that fair and reasonable remuneration that attracts a diverse and representative pool of candidates from among Canmore residents requires the recognition of the 3 key factors that I mentioned at the outset. In other words, the fact that there is a heavier workload for members of council, certainly compared to what there used to be, but especially in relation to our comparators. Secondly, the variability of hours can make it infeasible to secure alternate sources of income, particularly employment income. And last, local affordability necessitates a higher remuneration than a direct comparison with our external comparators might suggest. So it's our view that an appropriate remuneration that accounts for these 3 factors can be expected to attract a more diverse pool of candidates. And last, as I just mentioned, the budget impact of our recommendations is approximately $161,000 per year. So that concludes my comments. I just want to turn to my colleagues and members of administration to see whether there's anything they'd like to mention. Well, then I guess I have to answer your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Saloff. And thank you to Mr. Orrell, Ms. Edward, Mr. Scott. Ms. Moran, and also to Ms. Rogers, Ms. Sauve, and Ms. Noel for all of your work, substantial work that was done, and for paving the way for this committee going forward into the future. I'm sure there's going to be some questions of clarification about what this, that, or the other thing means, but I just wanted to right from the outset appreciate all the work that you've done and appreciate the wonderful presentation that you've made. So with that, I will open it up to my colleagues to see if they have any questions. Councillor Faubert.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you for the presentation. When you were deliberating, were there any issues or areas that came up, or were the committee thought could be addressed by a future committee because it wasn't in your mandate? For example, use of home office space, or that was the best example I could come up with. That was one.
You know, we did touch on that. I'm trying to remember exactly where we ended up. I think we looked at, you know, the tax provisions and just decided that, you know, you can, you know, I guess, achieve some sort of relief from the tax provisions that allow home offices. But that's about as far as we got. But in terms of other areas, nothing jumps to mind in terms of, you know, it's not in the mandate. We would have really loved to have a look at that, but, you know, that would have taken us outside what we were asked to do. Does everybody agree with that?
Great. Awesome. Great. Any other question at this time?
No, I know there's other questions.
Okay. Councillor Ma.
Thank you, Worship, and thank you so much for the hard work you guys did. Like that could not have been an easy process, and the fact that you guys were so diligent and sounds like you did so much work to try to get to here, that's really appreciated. So thank you. One question I was curious, it seems like we're living in an increasingly litigious society, and I look at my colleagues on this panel. Some of them are, you know, experiencing the continued duress of lawsuit. I would not surprise me if moving forward in future councils, that threat is something that continues to arise as a potential. Was that factored into your ponderance of working conditions?
No, I think to the extent that it was really, again, in that size of the job when you're talking about complexities and, you know, again, I suppose for lack of a better term, the mental strain. You know, again, there was no formula. And when you're saying, well, somebody who has this level of qualifications does this job, they're probably, to your point, it's not the same. And that is something that, you know, is an important factor. And again, you know, we can't really say that it had a particular weight. We kind of threw all of it in the pot and used our best judgment. And the one thing I'll just throw in, I guess, somewhat gratuitously, it was kind of interesting in the approach we took. We avoided prematurely arriving at any sort of numbers. You know, over a course of meetings, we looked at various types of data, discussed it, but we specifically refrained from attaching numbers. But when we were finished the review, we said, okay, let's go away before the next meeting and think about all of this and come back with recommendations. And we all came with our own number, wondering how far apart we were going to be. And, you know, we were remarkably similar, which I think gives me and hopefully you some degree of comfort. But I do take your point in that this is a very unique job. So, you know, we did identify it, we did discuss it, and to that extent it was factored into our deliberations.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Rogers?
I just wanted to add in as a reminder for all of council that we did briefly discuss that. And we have both the employee-related legal proceedings policy, which does apply to council, as well as the insurance that we have covering sort of the litigious side. It doesn't address, I guess, the stress that comes with that. But certainly in terms of protection, when folks are doing their work to the best of their ability and in good faith, that would apply.
I'm going to ask a question around what is, and this is probably from Ms. Rogers, what is the anticipated time for return should these motions be passed that we would expect to see changes to the bylaws and policies that are identified?
We are targeting a fall return to council for approval because of the impact on budget of the recommendations. We'd want you to be able to see what we're proposing in terms of bylaw and policy before you're making budget decisions.
And just to divide the recommendations into two tranches, one being a financial impact, especially around the remuneration, those wouldn't take effect until after the election in 2025, correct?
That's correct.
Right. Now, with regards to the ability to access medical leave or maternity leave, those sorts of things, might those be effective immediately once those bylaws are passed?
They certainly could, yep.
Okay, so they wouldn't have to wait till the following council?
That's right. Because there's no direct financial impact of those leave recommendations, they could take effect once council approves the policy or passes the bylaw. And then the budgetary impacts would take effect following the next election. So with that new council in October of 2025.
I like that because we can actually approve those things now on an ad hoc basis. But it would be better if they arose, that we actually have them being rolled out according to a policy. Right.
Correct.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I will go to Councillor Graham and then go to Councillor McCallum.
Thank you, Your Worship. I too want to thank the committee for all the hard work that they've done on this one. I've done a lot of employee reviews and been through a few myself, but I've never ever done one like this style. Very interesting. I wanted to chat a little bit about per diems and how they're structured and how we actually came up with the current structure that we have. We're currently at 1 to 4 hours, we get paid a certain amount. At 4 to 8 hours, we get paid another amount, and 8 hours over, we get paid another amount. And I was curious as to why does that structure exist like that, as opposed to, say, an hourly rate. There are meetings that I come to that I'm there for 15 minutes. There are meetings that I'm there for 3 hours and 59 minutes, and there are meetings that I go to that are well over 11 hours or over 8 hours. I'm just curious as to why it was structured that way. Why it's structured that way?
It's a historical practice and was common across municipalities. And when you look at per diem comparisons across municipalities, at least within Alberta, that chunking of time is how they have been structured. And it's essentially a rate it's called a piece rate as opposed to an hourly rate of pay. And it's to attempt to recognize some variability and unpredictability in the work that you're doing. And we have over time kind of talked about, do those times make sense? And we sort of looked at the 1 to 4 hours generally represents kind of a half day. You might have a morning worth of meetings or the 15 minutes that you referenced. And then there are meetings that are 4 to 8 hours, which might be some meeting. We often have a special meeting or workshops that might be 6 hours in length. So recognizing that it's more than just a morning's commitment. The per diem is intended to compensate you for the time when you're in a meeting, even if it is a 15-minute meeting, hopefully not a 15-hour.
There's been a couple of those.
Been a couple of those. You can't really plan anything else that day, right? So if you need to take the morning off from work because the meeting might be 15 minutes, but it might be 4 hours, we're really trying to recognize what's the compensation lost to you for that chunk of time, again, rather than by an hourly rate. But it is a common approach in municipalities. That's the history that I know. It was like that when I started here, and every review we've done since shows a very similar approach in most municipalities. The amount is different. Sometimes the hours vary a little bit depending on the nature of the municipality. In some municipal districts that are very large geographically, they have slightly larger timeframes because they try to account for the fact that you have to travel sometimes a significant amount to get to your place of work. So.
Yeah, being a politician's a little like being an entrepreneur, that you're always kind of thinking about things and being on, and you know, for me, I bring in staff for when I have to attend meetings, and so there's that cost to me, and that gives me that flexibility and that privilege to sit at this desk. Yeah, it's interesting. I look at the, yeah, thank you very much.
Councillor McCallum.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you everyone for your presentation. I'm getting an echo. Are you getting an echo?
Not bad.
Okay, all right, perfect. To Councillor Graham's comment, I have been around 100 years, and the per diem amount was increased when the taxable status was removed by the federal government for municipal wages. So it went from, I think it was $100 for a per diem up to whatever it is now, 125. Is that what it is? Yeah, perfect. Anyway, so that's just some history. And then when I was first elected in 2010, actually, you were given a cap on your per diems. You were allowed a base salary, and then I think which was 26 grand, and we were permitted 85 per diems per year. So by October, I was staying up till 2 in the morning so that my babies would sleep and I could be prepared for my meetings the next morning. Again, a bit more history. So my question is just to confirm, so based on the recommendations from the committee, and I thank you all for your hard work. It's not easy. You know, you're comparing apples to carburetors sometimes, and every municipality is different. So it's tricky to know what applies to what. My question is, so conferences, education would still be per diemable. Is that correct, sir?
Sorry, I didn't quite catch the very end of that.
Yeah, so the
Okay.
conferences and education pieces, they would still be per diemable.
That's right.
Is that correct? Yeah, that's what I thought. And was there any discussion about the caregiver amount that we instituted a bunch of years ago? Is that still going to stay within the package?
That's still, we would recommend remain within the policy. We've had,
Perfect.
I think, no use or one instance of use since we put it in. So we didn't spend a lot of time talking about that, spending the time instead on the bigger issues. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree. I just wanted to make sure because I think compensation is a full package, and that is one piece of it that is important, whether it's for taking care of your children or taking care of elderly parents or whomever. And I just wanted to understand, so the discussion around AMSC coverage versus workers' compensation, how are councillors currently covered under the AMSC coverage? I don't think I've ever been aware of this.
I'll answer that one.
Thanks, Joe.
And I need glasses, sorry.
Don't we all?
So our current coverage under AMSC is the level C, and it provides an AD&D life insurance component with some medical coverage, and also a weekly indemnity of $250 per week, which you would get whether you're losing income or not. So you have the idea with AMSC or WCB is that we would be limiting your exposure to loss of income and losses due to medical coverage. And so when we look at our whole package, our benefits, this AMSC insurance and the medical leave policy that we would be bringing forward, we feel like that exists. And he's got the 24-hour coverage, which you wouldn't have with WCB. I know that we would have to justify every injury, and then WC would adjudicate whether or not it's related to the work that you're doing, which we don't have with AMSC. So there's a principal sum of $100,000, and then there are all kinds of other medical benefits for family and the member under AMSC.
Gotcha. Thanks.
Yep.
And my last question, which popped up when you were presenting, sir, was about the tax provisions for home office within CRA. Does that exist for counselors right now? Just the way it was touched on, it was like it was existed. Now, I know during COVID, individuals were able to access a certain amount of dollars for working from home, and which I think many people took advantage of. But outside of that, I don't believe there's any provisions for us to file taxes in that way, correct?
No, the provisions that were in place from CRA during the pandemic are no longer in place. But if you have a home office, in order to earn an income, you can deduct it from your income taxes. And then they typically would ask your employer or place of work to provide a T2200 to let you know, to confirm that we aren't paying for that space.
Okay, you and I will have to talk about that offline in the future, because I think that this is an important part of education of future counselors. I've been in this role 14 years nearly. I never knew about that.
It used to be we'd get that tax deduction, like a certain amount was not taxed, but when that covered materials they would use in home office. But when that went away, then yeah, you're right. I think that this is something that should be made new counselors should be informed of, so that they could take advantage of it.
Take advantage of it, yeah, definitely. Because if that's something that's been available to us, like I think that the rules changed, was it in 2017 with the feds? If that's something that's changed, I was not made aware of an alternate ability for me to do anything through CRA between then and when the pandemic hit. So yeah, I think that there's some onboarding information like that that would be required when new counselors are sworn in. Yeah, that's all. That's all my questions. Thank you so much. And thank you for all this hard work. I know a lot of other counselors will speak in the same way. You know, this is, it is very important that moving forward, our community has people that run whose heart are in the right place. And the only way we can do that is if we provide them with decent income. This is not hard work. This is hard work. I mean, this is 24/7 a job. We are stopped everywhere. We don't have the protections that higher level of government officials have when they move through their community or through other communities. And so I think that I'm hoping that everybody votes in favor of this, that moving forward, that this will allow members of our community to see themselves in this role that weren't able to see themselves in this role because of the financial aspect. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Just a couple of things before I go to our next question. A little bit of history also is that in 2018, it was brought in clarity around per diems that were non-consecutive could both be claimed independently, even if the total of them was less than like a 4-hour period. That was something that was didn't exist when I was on council, and that was a good improvement. So that was an adjustment as well to per diems. The other thing I wanted to point out, process-wise, just as Councillor McCallum has done, I think it's a good idea to, if you ask questions or to express interest in what you would like to see in a policy as far as per diems. Of course, that policy will come back to us, and we'll have the opportunity to bring amendments if, let's say, something falls in the base rate that council believes should be in a per diem rate, or vice versa, or something's missing or anything like that. So this is a good time to raise it so that maybe it can be captured in the first version that comes to us for approval, but it will be subject to potential amendments when it comes to us in the fall. Okay, so with that then, I'll move to Councillor Faubert.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I believe that the T2200 came out of me because I was having some tax problems and the government asked me for that form. And I was like, what is this form? And so it got me curious about it, and I think that what's really great is that while this is the first committee that's done this review, I clearly see that what we're doing is we're establishing the future as well. And so these things that come up, we now have a mechanism and a venue through which to look at them. And I think that that's really positive for the future. Now, my question was around per diems and the role of deputy mayor. The committee is recommending to place those per diems into the base salary, but the role of deputy, and I guess my question is, what was the rationale around that? Because sometimes the deputy mayor role can be quite intense depending on what time of year you're holding that role.
Well, our rationale on that was really twofold. One, that the deputy mayor responsibilities does end up on all of your plates at one time or another. And again, the justification really for, as I said before, moving required activities to base salary was to say, now the base salary reflects all of what you are expected and have to do. If it comes to municipal events and not all of the councillors have to attend or not attend at all, that's optional. But we were striving for a situation where the base salary reflected the total amount of the commitment, even in a case like this where that commitment isn't all of the time.
Yeah, makes sense.
Just on that may be, depending how it comes back. For example, agenda review I could see as being part of base salary because we typically, it's fairly similar, a little lighter in the summer, but things that are asked for by the mayor for the person to step in, that should be per diemable.
Okay.
Because that's what I would think, because it definitely fluctuates. And Councillor Ma has had so many asks of him in the last little bit, and it's for no other reason. It's just some things came up that I was already planning to be away at a conference or whatever, and others have absolutely none. And it's not playing favorites or anything like that. It's simply about. Well, for example, I plan on being at the, in the summer. You were asked to do an introduction the first year for Folk Festival. I was there last year. I plan to be there again. So that's we'll see where it comes, but that's a discussion that we could have when the bylaw comes before us to fine tune around where those things land, and there might be a hybrid needed for some things, such as the deputy mayor role.
I think that's a really good point. The only thing I was thinking around agenda review is in closer to like when we're in budget time and in the fall, we tend to have more meetings and there might be more agenda reviews. But I like the way that you're kind of looking at that role and what the ask is.
Yeah, we tend not to do agenda review for the finance committee meetings in the fall, just because of the volume and how quickly it is put together. But we'll approach that in that way. Did you have any other questions? I interrupted there.
No, I have one more.
Go for it.
When the policy returns to council, should we pass the motion, will the changes to the policy also formalize the committee? Or have we already formalized the committee in a way that in 4 years from now, we're going to be doing this again?
I think the Council Remuneration Review Committee bylaw formalizes the committee.
Okay.
And so every fourth year at the October organizational meeting, we would have council select committee members. Yeah, because it's on a 4-year cycle, it's maybe from that perspective a little bit different than annual committees, but the bylaw formalizes that structure, and unless you see a need to change that, I think it can stand. Yeah.
I just didn't remember. I'm sorry.
No,
Great.
that's okay.
Thank you. Councillor Ma.
Thank you, Worship. And I think Councillor Faubert brings up some interesting points about the deputy mayor piece that we can explore later, because it does feel like it's like an intermediary role. And there are times where it can be a bit of a heavy lift. And there may be times, where depending what's going on, like some councillors may work more months as a deputy mayor than other years. So yeah, it definitely has some room for investigation. Question for committee. So we have this maximum 16 hours per month piece. And so if we have more meetings than the 16 hours, we charge per diems. Would that still carry forward? I'm trying to understand that piece under your guys' recommendation, because there are times, for example, as you highlighted, say the month of November, we can have our regular council meetings, then we'll be into our finance committee meetings, and we can go quite far past our 16 hours of meetings. So, yeah. I'm sorry,
should just
Craig.
stay
You have to
up here.
come
That's
up. You have
okay.
to sit down. I'm sorry.
You're welcome. The thinking there was that the base salary was increased to account for additional meetings like Finance Committee. So we had done an assessment over the last 3 years. We mapped out all of the meetings that you have: workshops, Finance Committee meetings, council meetings, agenda review, and then calculated that average number of hours. So this up to 4 council meetings per month to the maximum of 16 hours never included Finance Committee. And so we're not suggesting that it would now include Finance Committee, because the base wage has been increased to compensate for the fact that you all have to attend those meetings. And that really was the theory that the committee worked under, was where these events or meetings are required by everyone, that should be part of your base salary. And so that's the recommendation around increasing your base. Where things are considered more optional, you can decide if you go or you don't go, but you're not required to attend. Those moved into the per diem. I'm not answering your question, I guess. We're not recommending a change to the 16 hours per month because the base wage was increased to account for things like Finance Committee meetings.
Okay, so we're not recommending that. So it's kind of like we're not recommending a change to the 16-hour part. Yeah, because it's kind of
Like
covered in
this
2
wouldn't
parts of
go
the table. Because when I
up,
look
yeah.
at, say, like on page 29, it's the special council meetings over and above the 4 meetings, or max 16 hours. A regular scheduled council meetings covered by base rate, including. Okay, so that's kind of like status quo to what we're talking about right now.
Yeah, I mean, we have to look at the wording at once. If you
Okay.
accept the recommendations, we need to look at the wording of some of these. That one probably needs a little bit of a tweak to add
Okay.
Finance Committee and to be clear what is included and what isn't included. I tried to do that in that chart on the last page, to just say this is how it currently reads in your policy and this is the essence of what the committee is recommending, but the words of some of those things are going to have to change.
Okay.
For one, there was the council CAO meetings. It's listed currently as 2 meetings per month per diemeable. 1 is required, 1 is optional, so we need to split that.
Right.
So there are
okay.
some of those types
Yeah.
of things that we'll just need to tweak the wording. And the one with the 16 hours, we're going to have to look at how we manage that. Because we have to add Finance Committee in there if you have a month with public hearings. Right, we just have to figure that out still.
Okay, and I guess we'll keep figuring that out in the fall.
We will. We'll bring you a draft policy.
Okay,
and
all right,
then
great.
you
Just
can-
confirming. Okay, thank
You
you.
can speak to whether it
try to-
addresses your question or not.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Rogers.
We'll see how it reads when it comes to
Yeah.
us, and then we can.
They're all connected, so it's hard to
Yeah.
speak to one in isolation.
Councillor Graham.
Thank you, Your Worship. I have a couple, if I may. BOTA was specifically named as a per diemable meeting. I wondered if you could speak to that, why they were specifically named in here, and why other committees, such as Biosphere or any other committee that we are part of, may not be in here. Many executive directors have invited me to meet with them that I'm not on that committee, and yet that is not a per diemable amount at this point in time.
Okay, if sitting is the new smoking, I'm in good shape here.
Boards and committees were per diemable and remain as per diem. The BOTA is not considered a board or committee. It's a bit different, like a service club meeting, so that would include something like Rotary. It would also not be considered a board or committee, because you're not appointed to
Right.
BOTA. You're a guest at BOTA like you are at Folk Fest, Canada Day. So we can make the list longer if there are others that you want to include.
When an executive director from a board that I'm not currently sitting on invites me for a meeting, redeemable or not?
Base pay.
I don't think so, because that's part of informal meetings with other people.
Thank you very much.
But I don't sign off on them. You do, so.
Yep, base pay. Yep.
No, I'll leave this one alone. Thanks.
Okay. Councillor Mara.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you very much for all your hard work and your community service. You're doing this for no per diem, and we appreciate that, so thank you. My question has been answered, and also my second question I answered myself, so thank you.
I love questions like that. You can ask as many as you like.
But yeah, thank you for your service.
Question that you answered yourself.
Councillor Graham.
Councilor Mara led into something that I was pondering whether or not I would ask, and that was the significant
What
amount-
did she say that led to? She didn't ask anything.
She didn't, but she did though. She talked about, she said that, you guys did significant amount of work
Okay.
for free. And we have many community members that step forward for free to provide valuable services like this. It wasn't part of your mandate, but should the work of committees be included in remuneration?
That's a totally different topic.
Totally off.
Yeah.
It's a good question,
Yeah.
but another time question.
Yeah. So that's a budget question for whichever organization is running a particular meeting, some of which may or may not have town consequences.
We'll get there.
Okay. All right, I'm looking to see, Dr. Cottle.
Just jump in. I mean, I appreciate your diligence in raising this question, and I know it's something you're thoughtful about and can reach out to any of these folks to ask their personal opinion on. And I will offer that by publicly advertising, you got this committee to volunteer to do this work. So I do believe it's a significant lift, and they've really made a good contribution. So there are a lot of people in this community who are able and happy to volunteer. I think the key question is to figure out if there might be groups we're missing because of remuneration, but I think it's also important to distinguish that there is a role and a place and a need for volunteering that is not paid. So there, I just want to say that I think you got a really great committee as volunteers, and so the pay is not the only reason. There's a question of equity and ability to participate that's important, but that's distinct from the role of volunteerism.
Thank you, Ms. Cotter.
All right, I am not seeing any other questions. Going once? Going twice? All right, so thank you once again for your presentation, for your being here today. Obviously, by the amount of questions we have, and I think it's near and dear to all of our hearts. Not because we will necessarily benefit from these, but we are all believers in having good representation on council. And so if this can attract more people to apply that maybe otherwise couldn't beforehand, then that's a step forward in the right direction. And whoever gets elected at the following election will benefit from assuming this is approved today. So thank you for that work. It will have far-reaching impact not only on the next council, but you've set a path forward for future remuneration committees, and that's fantastic, so thank you. Now, Ms. Rogers, you were going to introduce the motions?
Yes, so we have 4 motions for council's consideration. They were in the request for decision that you reviewed. The first is to move that council accept the remuneration committee's recommendations. We have one then for you to direct administration to return to you with options for a maternity or parental leave bylaw. The third, to direct administration to return with options for a medical leave policy. And then finally, that the council remuneration policy be updated to reflect the changes that you're accepting. So I'll leave those. Happy to answer questions.
Thank you. Any questions about those motions before? Councillor McCallum.
Thank you. Ms. Rogers, the second and third item that are on the list, is that meant so that you will bring it back and we can change the immediacy of that particular amendment, or sorry, motion, the timing of that motion?
We actually have to create the bylaw and create the policy.
Yeah, no, I understand that. So when you bring it back,
Yeah.
will we as a council be able to say, yep, and we'd like that to start immediately
yes,
versus
yes.
the other two starting with the next election?
Yeah, so we heard that today, so we'll bring it back
Okay.
recommending that they start immediately, and if council wishes to do something different, you could change it at that time. But we'll go with
Perfect.
the
Thank you so
assumption that
much.
you
Then I
want
won't
those
bother
to
bringing
start.
forward my motion. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Councillor Faubert?
Yes, I just have a question about the fourth motion. Would the policy not come back to council as well?
Oh, yes.
So would it be that council direct administration to return to council with an update to the council remuneration policy as recommended?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's,
I'll take that as a friendly
administration
amendment.
doesn't have the authority to approve a policy. It's kind of inherent in, you have to do it.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
If you prefer to have the words in there, we can change it, but I think it,
I'll tack on a few words when we get to that
Yeah.
one. Great. Okay. All right, then, I will first move the council accept the Council Remuneration Review Committee's recommendations. Speaking to that motion, I've already spoken to the work that's been done and the importance of it, and will certainly be supporting this motion. Councillor Hillstead.
I didn't ask any questions because I thought the report was great and answered all my questions anyway. So I'm happy to support the recommendations. I think they were well thought out. Yeah, it was a great report, and thank you for all the hard work you put into it.
Thank you. Councillor Faubert, you'd like to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Your Worship. I think this committee had a lot of horsepower, and I'm really grateful for all the work that they did. And this is I'm really, this is kind of a full circle moment, because I think that when I was first elected, this was something that I know I wasn't alone in feeling that it would be important to address during our term. And, you know, bringing forward a motion for council to consider, and then council supporting that motion, and then us having a bylaw and creating a committee. The committee people came forward. You saw that we asked community members to do this work and help us, and you stepped forward, and I'm so grateful, because this is really important work. It's not sexy work, I guess is the word, right? It's not like exciting, or I think it's exciting, but I think that it's hard. This was hard work. This required all of the members of the committee to really think about us and our roles, and not only that, but to come forward with recommendations to create a better future with us, where we as a community go through this democratic process of having people put their names forward to say, I want to do this work for my community, and us choosing them once every 4 years. I can honestly say that the remuneration as a councillor is not, well, I want to stay positive. It's been challenging for me. I have 3 other jobs, but that's Canmore. That's not the council job. That's Canmore. And so I have to keep that in mind. And I think what the recommendations and the considerations brought forward for us are excellent. And it's not just that, it's the first step of this is now, we have a process where with our community, we look at how we compensate our leaders that step forward and to do this work. And I think that I'm really going, I don't know if I can like raise my hand differently or more excitedly this time, but I will try. Because, and so yeah, I'm just trying to say, this has been excellent work. And I thank you from the bottom of my heart for coming forward and helping us build a better future for our community together.
Thank you. Councillor Ma.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think Councillor Faubert hit upon a lot of the points that I wanted to touch upon. Like, as an elected official, this is my first term, and it's been a pretty eye-opening sort of experience. So you come in, I don't really know there's any sort of job you could do to prep you for this job, and then it changes your life completely. It changes your relationships. It changes how you like move about in your community. You're literally, before you're a councillor, you're one kind of person. After you're elected, your life is different. It's very different. I look at our existing council. I'm grateful to you guys because this is like, I feel, an incredible group of people that care deeply. And I know that across the board, all these councillors make huge sacrifices to like do this job. I look at some of us are business owners. I'm sure our businesses have struggled at times. We've had to lean on the flexibility of our businesses to make the sacrifices that we do as a councillor. And, you know, and that is the situation. I think right now, because you have 3 business owners that are able to be councillors, it might point that if you don't have the flexibility of owning a business, it could be hard to be on council, or if you're in a different stage in your life where your kids are out of the house, et cetera. So I think this is going to make a difference towards diversity, and hopefully opening up the ability so that if someone wants to serve, it is no longer necessarily a privilege. Because sometimes, you know, this is a really hard gig, but it doesn't feel like a privilege to get it. If I was not in the situation in my life right now, I probably couldn't do it. So yeah, it's, you know, like I think we're super close. There's probably maybe some tweaks as we get into the fall, but I really thank you guys for looking at this, and I feel valued. So thank you.
Councillor Graham.
I don't know what to say after my fellow councillors. You know, I want to thank Councillor Faubert for originally bringing this forward. It was an important piece of why I ran for council originally. I recognize fully the privilege that I have to be able to do this job. And not everybody has that privilege. So I want to see those folks that don't necessarily have the privilege that some of us do up here to be able to run. And this town needs diverse opinions and perspectives and understandings, life experience at this table to make the decisions that are important, that affect all of us. So thank you all for your work that you have done. And I look forward to the recommendations that come forward this fall.
Anyone else wishing to speak? Thank you, Councillor. Anyone else wishing to speak to the motion? Councillor McCallum.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think I covered quite a bit previously the importance of these changes, but I think I would just like to say that, you know, as we know, this is my last term, and so I'm really happy to see this come in for people like me. I was a young woman with 2 small children, and I won a seat. But we plant trees so that future generations can enjoy their shade, and I'm happy to plant a tree today. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. And before calling the vote, I just wanted to emphasize that the hours that were attributed to Councillor certainly do reflect what I had experienced when I was on council. I tracked my hours for the first 2 years, and they certainly fluctuated around the year. Summers being the lightest, probably less than 15 hours a week, and that includes stopping and all the talks that you have. People stop you on the trail or the grocery store, email, etc. But to, you know, budget time, over 40 hours a week between the various meetings and reviews, and then on top of that, you're still doing committees and being stopped in the grocery store and on the trails, etc. So I just wanted to affirm that. The other thing that I really appreciated this committee recognizing is that Canmore is a little bit of a different scenario, because of our cost of living. We can't be on the same grid as a community similar size, but also Canmore isn't comparable really with other municipalities of our size. We have a large shadow population. We have a large part-time resident population. We have issues with regards to congestion, environment, wildlife coexistence, physical parameters, et cetera, that make it a much more complicated scenario and more comparable to a larger center. And so I think that has been captured well, and I appreciate that. So I will now call the question on this motion. All in favor? Carried unanimously. I'll now move that council direct administration to return to council with options for a council maternity/parental leave bylaw. Would anybody like to speak to the motion? I think that this is overdue. We do see other communities moving in this direction and the MGA making allowance for it. We need to see what it actually looks like to fit within the council scenario. And I look forward to seeing that. Anybody else like to speak to the motion? Seeing none, I call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. I move that council direct administration to return to council with options for a council medical leave policy. In speaking to that motion, depending on the type of medical leave, it's sometimes very difficult to ask and to ask your colleagues to support you in what you need, particularly when in the realms of mental health. And so having a policy in place that gives one, as of right, the ability to take a certain amount of, short-term leave in order to get some help and, maybe allow the dust to settle for whatever situation you're in, is such an important thing. Because if you have to ask and then put yourself at the mercy of your colleagues to see that you need some help or some time, it can almost be an unmanageable barrier. And so I think that it's really important that we have this policy in place so that people know the situation and what their rights and opportunities are. Would anybody else like to speak to the motion? Councillor McCallum.
Thank you, Your Worship. I totally agree with you. As Councillor Graham pointed out, that this job is somewhat entrepreneurial, but it is very also sometimes quite lonesome. And it can also be a job in which you're very self-dependent, self-reliant. And so, when you find yourself in a medical situation, whether it be physical or mental health, the last thing you really want to do is to rely on the kindness of your colleagues to be able to allow you to take what is really a personal leave. Personal in terms of what's happening with you medically is actually personal to you. And you might find yourself in a situation where you have to start over-explaining to your colleagues as to why you need a leave. And so I think it would be great to have this in place prior to the next election. Not that I think this and the maternity bylaw, not that I think anybody is out to have a baby or get sick anytime, but it's just really preventative in a certain way. And I just want to see our our folks taken care of, especially when it comes to medical and maternity leave. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Graham?
Thank you, Your Worship. I was just at Federation of Canadian Municipalities, and a large theme throughout that was the public treatment of public officials. And the current political environment that we exist in, and quite frankly, the abuse that many of us take on a regular basis. It's unacceptable, and having this ability for councillors or politicians to take care of their mental health is incredibly important. So happy to very passionately support this one.
Thank you, Councillor. Anyone else wishing to speak to the motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. And finally, I will just insert a few words after the two. We'll put the Council-Directed Administration 2, return to Council with an update to the Council Remuneration Policy as recommended by the Council Remuneration Review Committee. So it's just inserting a few words after, so it's returned to Council. And I know that stating what probably doesn't need to be stated, but for clarity's sake and posterity's sake, it's good to see it. Moved by the Council, Direct Administration 2, return to Council. I wasn't yelling. Return to Council with, or to update. Or with an update, yeah. Whichever you prefer. Anyway, and then update to the, yeah, there we go. Okay, so I will move that the Council direct administration to return to Council with an update to the Council Remuneration Policy as recommended by the Council Remuneration Review Committee. Would anybody like to speak to this motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. And with that, I will move that we adjourn. All those in favor? All those in favor? Councillor McCallum?
She frozen?
No. Oh, yeah. Oh. Okay, well, she dropped out. She raised her hand. Carried unanimously. Carried unanimously. Thank you. And go